There are places in this world that feel wrong the moment you arrive. Not haunted house wrong, not horror movie wrong. Just a quiet, animal wrongness that settles in your chest like water finding a low place. I've traveled to 14 countries. I've slept in hostels in cities where I didn't speak the language, camped alone in forests where the nearest town was 40 miles away. I have never, in all of that, felt what I felt on Kelmara. And what makes it hard to talk about, what makes it hard to sleep about even now, isn't the island itself. It's the man who lived on it. And what we found in the building he told us never to go near. I'm telling this story because 2 of us made it back. The 3rd one nearly didn't. And I need people to understand that remote and peaceful are not the same thing. They are not even close to the same thing. There were 3 of us. Myself, my college friend Dana, and her boyfriend at the time, a guy named Price who had done this kind of trip before and fancied himself an expert in off-grid travel. This was his idea, an unnamed, barely charted small island off the coast of a Southeast Asian country. I'll keep vague for reasons that will become clear. He'd found it on a niche travel forum. The post described it as a hidden paradise, accessible only by hiring a local fisherman to ferry you across, with one small guest house, run by a man the post referred to only as the keeper. The post had 14 upvotes and no comments. We were 28 years old and stupid with the specific confidence of people who have never been truly afraid. The ferry crossing took 40 minutes in a narrow wooden boat piloted by an old man who didn't speak to us once during the journey. Not unfriendly, just silent. When we reached the island's small dock, he unloaded our bags without making eye contact and left immediately. No discussion of pickup time. Price had arranged the return for 5 days later. We watched the boat disappear and turned to face the island. Kelmara was small, maybe 2 miles end to end. Dense jungle interior, a ring of white sand beach. Water so clear you could see the bottom 20 feet out. It looked exactly like the photos. It smelled like salt and vegetation, and something underneath that I couldn't identify then and still can't now. Something faintly organic, something that didn't belong to the ocean. The keeper was waiting at the end of the dock. He was a tall man, lean, somewhere between 50 and 70. Age was difficult to read in his face. He had a stillness about him that I initially mistook for calm. He shook our hands, introduced himself with a name I couldn't pronounce and didn't retain, and led us up the dock to the guest house. On the walk, he spoke good English, asked where we were from, complimented the weather. He was perfectly pleasant. And yet, with every step, that wrongness in my chest settled deeper. The guest house was clean and simple. 3 rooms, a shared bathroom, a small open-air kitchen. He showed us around, explained the generator ran until 10 p.m., and pointed out a path that led to the best snorkeling on the North Beach. Then, before he left us to unpack, he paused at the door and said something I've replayed in my head hundreds of times since. He said, "The south part of the island is not for guests. The path ends where it ends. Please don't walk past the red stones." He said it pleasantly, almost offhandedly, like he was telling us not to leave wet towels on the furniture. Then he smiled and walked back toward a small structure further up the hill that I assumed was his private dwelling. Price immediately decided the red stones were something we needed to find. The first 2 days were genuinely beautiful. We snorkeled. We ate the simple meals the keeper left outside our doors each morning and evening. Fruit, rice, fresh fish, and we explored the accessible parts of the island. The keeper appeared periodically, always at a distance, always watching with that still expression that I'd started to find less calming and more unsettling as the hours passed. He never joined us. He never initiated conversation after that first day. He was simply present, at the edge of the tree line, on the hill above the guest house, once standing on the dock at 3 a.m. when I got up to use the bathroom and looked out the window. Just standing there, looking out at the water, not moving. I told Dana the next morning. She said he was probably just an insomniac, an old man living alone on an island. Of course, his sleep patterns were strange. I agreed, because I wanted to agree. On the third day, Price found the red stones. They were exactly that, a line of large reddish rocks arranged across the south path in a way that was clearly intentional, not a natural formation. Placed. The path continued visibly beyond them, winding further into the jungle interior. Price stepped over them without hesitation. Dana followed. I stood at the stones for a long moment, looking back toward the guest house, which was not visible from here. Then I followed. The path beyond the stones was older, less maintained, the vegetation pressing in close on both sides. It smelled stronger here. That organic smell from the dock, amplified now, with something underneath it that made my stomach turn. Not rotting exactly. Something more recent than rot. After about 10 minutes of walking, the path opened into a small clearing. In the clearing was a low concrete building, rectangular, no windows, a single rusted metal door. Around the perimeter of the building, on the ground, were dozens of small items. Bottles, bundles of dried vegetation tied with twine, stones arranged in small clusters. It looked deliberate. It looked like something that was maintained. Price tried the door. It was padlocked. He looked at the padlock, looked at us, and grinned. Dana was taking photos. I was watching the tree line. The smell was coming from the building. Through the gap beneath the door, less than an inch of space, something was seeping out. It took me several seconds to understand what it was. It was sound. Very faint, barely audible, but rhythmic. A low sound. The kind a person makes when they are too exhausted or too damaged to make a louder one. I grabbed Price's arm. I told him what I was hearing. He crouched at the door gap and listened. He heard it too because his face changed completely. Dana stopped taking photos. We ran. Not because we made a rational decision to run. My body simply turned and moved, and the others moved with me, back up the path, over the red stones, through the tree line and out onto the north beach where there was open sky and space and no sound except the water. We stood on the beach, breathing hard. Price had his phone out. No signal. There had been no signal since we arrived. The forum post had mentioned this, had framed it as charm. We needed to find the keeper. We found him in the kitchen of the guest house, preparing the evening meal. When we walked in, all three of us breathing hard, sunburned, clearly rattled. He looked up from what he was doing, and his expression did not change at all. He just looked at us, waiting. Price told him we'd walked south, that we'd found the building, that we'd heard something inside it. The keeper set down the knife he was holding, very slowly, and looked at Price for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "What you heard is not your concern. What happens on this island is not your concern." He said it in the same pleasant tone he used for everything. Then he picked the knife back up and continued preparing the meal. Dana already had her bag half packed by the time Price and I reached the rooms. We were not waiting 4 more days. We were not staying another night. Price found the fisherman's contact number in his notes. He'd written it down before losing signal. There was a radio on a shelf in the guest house common room, the kind used for maritime communication. Price had some experience with them from a sailing trip the year before. He got a signal out to the mainland, not the fisherman specifically, but a harbor contact who said he would pass the message. We spent that night locked in our rooms. The generator cut out at 10, as promised, and the island went completely dark. I lay on my cot with my back to the wall and listened. Sometime around 1 in the morning, I heard footsteps on the path outside, slow, unhurried, passing my window and continuing down toward the south. I did not look out. I did not move. A boat arrived at dawn. Not our fisherman, a different one, apparently sent by the harbor contact. We were on it before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. As we pulled away from the dock, I looked back. The keeper was standing at the end of the dock, watching us leave. Same posture as always. Same stillness. He raised one hand, not a wave exactly, more like an acknowledgement. We reported what we'd heard to the maritime authorities in the nearest mainland town. It took 3 days of persistent contact before anyone took it seriously enough to act. A team eventually went to the island. What they found in that concrete building, I know only in partial terms. What was shared with us officially and what Dana, who pushed harder than any of us for answers, eventually confirmed through a contact she made in the local press. There had been a person inside, a woman. She had been on the island for an undetermined period of time. She was alive. Beyond that, I was told the details were part of an ongoing investigation, and I was not given more. I have not been given more since. The keeper was not on the island when authorities arrived. The guest house was empty and clean. His personal structure on the hill was empty and clean. There was no boat registered to him or the island. He was simply gone. The forum post that Price had used to find Mara was deleted sometime in the weeks following our return. Price searched for it repeatedly. Gone, with no archive. Someone had posted it. Someone had wanted people to come. I think about the food he left outside our doors every morning and evening. I think about how we never saw him prepare it until that last evening. I think about the 14 upvotes on a post that had no comments. 14 people who might have read it, some of whom might have gone. I think about the fisherman who piloted us there and never made eye contact. I think about how the keeper knew when we walked into that kitchen exactly where we had been and what we had done, without us having told him yet. The island knew we were there from the moment we arrived. Every movement, every path, every deviation from where we were supposed to be. He knew. I have traveled nowhere since. My passport is in a drawer. Sometimes Dana calls, and we don't talk about it. We talk about other things, ordinary things, until enough time has passed that it feels almost manageable. Almost. Price broke up with Dana 2 months after we came home. He doesn't talk about the trip at all. Dana told me he wakes up sometimes in the night and just sits at the edge of the bed in the dark. Not crying, not doing anything, just sitting. I understand that. I do the same thing. Some places have an owner, and some owners have a purpose for their guests that has nothing to do with hospitality. Mara is still out there. 14 upvotes, no comments. And somewhere on some forum, on some quiet corner of the internet, a new post is probably already written.